And joining us now in the studios is Sandy Middleton, the Executive Director of the Center for Violence Prevention. And Sandy is accompanied by Chief Dean Scott, Chief of the Pearl Police Department. Sandy, Chief, good to have you guys in the studio.
Thanks.
It's been a while, Chief, since you and I spoke. And we're here to talk about human trafficking in Mississippi. Let's see, Saturday was a day which marked the World Day Against Human Trafficking. Is that how it's styled?
Right. Yeah. The World Day Against Human Trafficking. And I thought it would be cool. You know, Dean and I started working human trafficking cases back in 2015, we decided. 14 or 15, when he was at Hines SO. So, you know, we thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk about how it's changed since that time.
You know, anytime we've discussed that on the program with you guys, with the Attorney General, of course, who's heavily involved in this issue, law enforcement, it's always comes at a bit of a shock to the citizens of Mississippi that this is occurring in the state of Mississippi. I think normally they think about this issue being something that is occurring in other states, but not right here under our nose in Mississippi. But I got to tell you, Chief, you really opened my eyes. I had the pleasure of watching you speak to I believe the Rankin County Republican Women had you come in a while back, and you shared some actual accounts of human trafficking that occurring in your area.
Yes, sir.
And that honestly was an eye-opener, to say the least. How are we doing, Sandy? How are we doing? Are we getting better at addressing this issue and stopping it, or is it still as rampant as ever?
Well, it's rampant as ever. And, you know, of course, we can get into the whole thing about the border, which we're already seeing the effects of those people coming in and how unprepared we are to deal with that. That's a whole other thing that we can talk about. But I did bring some stats because everybody wants to hear the stats. So, like I said, Dean and I started this back in 2014, and then we opened the Tower, which is the Center for Violence Prevention's human trafficking program. We opened it in 2017. And here's the stats I have. So since then, we have assisted 522 suspected victims. More than 260 of these victims received outreach support services. 73 were actually housed at the Tower. 61 were assisted in our emergency shelter. 46% of those were racial and ethnic minorities. And then since then, let's see, we've had tips on more than 644 children since 2020 that was fielded by each one of our Tower team advocates, our rapid response advocates. And also the National Human Trafficking Hotline has documented an increase. 72 tips came in 2017, 227 came in 18, 246 in 2019, and there were 710 in 2020. So all the indicators, when you're talking about tips to the hotline, you're talking about actual cases that our rapid response advocates respond to with law enforcement and with CPS if it's a minor, those numbers have gone up dramatically. So, and I think our legislation helped a lot with that, and it also helped to have Speaker Gunn and AG Fitch. They made this one of their key issues, and both of them have really done so much to move us forward. So, and Dean can talk about the difference in the law enforcement approach, but it certainly is a bigger number.
Yeah. So, Chief, again, when you shared some of these actual stories about things where you would sometimes just randomly come up on situations and you'd realize this is a human trafficking scenario.
That goes back to one of the main things they teach in the classes now with detective classes, and even in Police Academy, they do a series of trafficking now. It's actually become a recognized crime. And with that, I want to note, because I know people think, well, you know, why did this just happen in 14, 15? It didn't. The spotlight in Mississippi, we finally got a spotlight put on it.
Yeah.
This is a nationwide issue that's been being addressed. Well, in Mississippi, it just became an issue to address and having a platform to push it on, because now you have so many people that have an interest. faith-based groups, law enforcement, private business. They want to donate because it takes funds to do all this. But as far as the law enforcement aspect, we've always seen it. And a lot of times, a young patrolman wouldn't know what he was looking at. And in putting these classes into the curriculum, they have an idea of what they're looking at and know how to react and know the proper questions to ask. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, now, years ago, and I know you know a lot of law enforcement officers, mm-hmm. when you come out of the academy, just like myself, you wanted to work narcotics. That was a big thing. I want to work in dope. I want to work in narcotics. Everybody I interview, young, that's what they want to do because that's what we saw on TV. Yeah, that was the cool guys, cool cars and all that. Well, now the shift has kind of turned. You have guys, this is their interest. Can't explain it other than information is available, classes are available, and it's a new way to make a difference.
Interesting. So when you come across these situations, Chief, are most of those being trafficked, the individuals that are in this situation, are they from out of state or in state?
What we see the most of, honestly, and Sandy can back me up on this, are in state and their own families the ones doing the trafficking. And I think that's probably what I discussed.
It sure was, and that's just shocked me.
But that goes back to the need for drugs.
Right.
Like we talked about and what you saw.
Yep.
And don't forget foster care.
Foster care.
Not only
it's a great thing, but it can be a nightmare.
Yeah, but we see a lot of exploitation.
What do you mean by that? Foster care.
Well, people kids who are placed in foster homes who, Dean and I worked a case where there was a foster mom and there were multiple teenagers placed in her house and she was trafficking every one of them.
On Craigslist.
That was a long time ago. But
several years ago. And I think, again, that program, because of that particular instance, and probably nationwide, that whole system, the investigating of a proposed foster parent has really gone in depth now, where it's not just a friend of a friend of a friend.
Yeah, I mean, the Department of Human Services, right, is responsible for placing foster children.
CPS.
Right. Okay, Child Protective Services.
And I would say their efforts are much greater.
Yeah, because it's been a while, but my wife and I actually served as foster parents for two foster children.
Yeah, I commend you.
One was in the 8th grade and one was in the 10th. So they were teenage boys who had suddenly lost their mother and had no other family and went to school where my natural kids went to school and anyhow. So, but I recall that was a fairly rigorous training program we had to go through, and lots of checking and background checking and vetting and come to your house, and I mean it was and made I want to say a monthly visit the social worker did to the house.
Yeah, and I think, what we got to realize is the kind of people who are traffickers. Yeah. I mean, they can be very manipulative. They can be people that we don't expect them to be. I mean, we all have this image of what a pimp looks like or what a trafficker looks like. And it's just like, we talk about the majority of sexual abuse cases with kids happen from people they know. And so, it's really hard to identify these people, and especially like Dean was talking about, before we really knew a lot of the right questions to ask. I mean, we were too quick to say, well, there's mental health issues there, when what there really was trauma. Yeah. And they didn't need a pill or a diagnosis. They needed some appropriate intervention for trauma.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard as well. I want to say it was the Attorney General, when she's been on the program talking about it, discussed that the children that are being trafficked often don't even know there is life outside of that there's a different way of life. Because they've been in it. Right, grew up in it, and they think this is how everybody is.
That's right. And so they don't really, and we see that with adult victims as well. They see it as a choice. And so that's part of what makes it so difficult to get them out of the life, is by the time they're adults, they've been involved in it since they were children. And so it's hard to convince them that that's not normal life.
Gotcha. We got a break right here. You guys are going to hang around with us, aren't you?
Sure.
Yeah. We got Sandy Middleton and the chief of Pearl Police Department are in the Element Well Studios. We're going to take a break right here and come right back. Stay with us. Mississippi, we've got Sandy Middleton the Executive Director of the Center for Violence Protection, and Chief Dean Scott for the Pearl Police Department, talking about human trafficking. So, Sandy, give us a little overview of exactly what the Center for Violence Prevention does. How do you guys get involved in this human trafficking scourge?
Okay, well, we have two parts to deal with human trafficking. One is our rapid response, which I talked a little bit about before, where we have advocates who are spread all around the state who are certified actually by the Attorney General's office out of one of the pieces of legislation that we passed that set all that up. But they go with law enforcement when a minor is recovered or when an adult is recovered, and we immediately are on the scene to help meet the needs of that victim, to help find a placement for them. And of course, the challenge for us right now is in Mississippi. There's no place for our kids, and so we're sending kids out of state. We're trying to piecemeal some sort of program to for them. Thankfully, our coalition is working to get a home open for girls, and we're leaning forward for that to happen because I think we can fill it up in about 3 months the way things are going. But so that's one side of our program, and the other is actually the Tower, which is our specialized long-term program for adult victims of trafficking, where they can come and take their time to heal. We have all sorts of trauma therapy, all sorts of evidence-based tools that we use to help them recover, and they can stay as long as 2 years. Sometimes they bring their dog with them. Sometimes they have a pet, and many times they come with a real complicated case. They may have legal charges. They may have a child that they've lost custody of. Most of them have burned bridges with family or either didn't have family to start with. And so they just come with this whole ball of issues that our team just comes around them. We've got 40 employees, and we do just a little bit of everything. And so we help them with all of that and just give them the time to recover. So it's been hugely successful. So on one side of the coin, we talk about, the big problem that we have and the increase and all of that. But then on the other side, it's a blessing to know, and we thank the Lord for, the ability to have this program, and we see people's lives changed every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Chief, is there a sort of a standard, typical profile that you see with respect to someone that's being trafficked?
It ages from like we talked about, from family members trafficking, and I hate to be blunt, but a 3-year-old child to service a drug addiction, and they leave their children with these drug dealers, and they submit them to any type of evil that you can possibly imagine. It's just like we talked about earlier. I think we talked about it off air. CPS. They do the vetting system. It's a very thorough vetting system, and we're not here to beat up on anybody at all, because we as law enforcement, we get lied to every day, and these people are con artists. That's what they do, and it's all about money. So evil gets by everybody, and that's just what it is. Evil has many faces, and is there one stereotypical child? No. Or one adult? Because we have seen, and I know Sandy's will back me up on this, there are as many child male victims as there are female.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about that.
Sure did. And so something else that I recall you discussing as well, Chief, was that sometimes these minors will just be dumped off for the weekend at a hotel.
Well, that's what's it. They're surrendered. If what we see with family, like we talked about, what we see the most of here is a family member that has a drug addiction that is a parent. And they will leave their child at the mercy of these drug dealers to fulfill their habit. Well, the agreement is I'll leave them overnight, leave them for the weekend. And what you get into then is they're leaving them for sexual purposes, not to play video games. And during that, they will be subject to the most evil you can imagine. And I can't, as a parent of a special needs child, I don't see how anybody could do that. But that just shows you how strong a drug addiction is. And it's heartbreaking for the other family members. And what people don't realize, it gets forgotten. Law enforcement are people too.
Sure.
And then when they go in and they see these cases, it affects them, especially if they have kids. And I won't call any names, but it affects them to the point when they're trying to speak publicly, they freeze up because they start remembering. And the one thing that I have found that investigators try, including myself, we try to forget.
It's trauma.
And I myself have stepped in for one and told him I've got this just so he could compose himself.
It's trauma. It's truly tough on our law enforcement partners. It's truly difficult, and especially when, we're talking about here in Mississippi where we don't have that place like the tower for our children, and they have to sit back and watch them go to juvenile detention when, they're just a victim. So it's really tough, and nobody's leaning forward anymore for these new places than law enforcement because they see what happens in the moment and in the emergent response, and it gets really hopeless for them sometimes, and that's why they love having us around is because we're like, hey.
Because it doesn't happen between 8 and 5.
Yeah,
we'll take care of that. I mean, we'll show up at 2 o'clock in the morning and we'll help.
And to add to that, that's why when I've taught a lot of these guys or helped them get into it, in all honesty, you've got about a 5-year shelf life because that's all you mentally can take. I'm
sure. Are we making any sort of treatment, targeted treatment, specific treatment available to law enforcement that are encountering this situation?
Not really, but like my agency, with anything, we offer assistance, counseling, to speak. Anytime an officer goes through a traumatic event that is reported or we actually see, we make sure they get the chance to go. Now, sometimes we order them to go.
Yeah.
But a lot of the guys that I've watched do this, I have recommended. They have. Some help, some that, just like any other walk of life, a banker or anything, you have alcohol problems in law enforcement. A lot of injuries involved, and I think it's nationwide. You have prescription addiction with injuries.
But cops are different than cops are warriors, and so I think.
But they're people too, and that's what people have to remember.
Sure.
But it's harder to treat, air quotes,
to show that weak face,
a warrior because it's they don't like to show that side, and so it's really hard on them.
Yeah, they have a concern that it would be perceived as weakness on their part, which is absolutely not. They're humans, as the chief said.
Right.
So a question for you, Sandy: is there? I know we had a pretty big law that the Speaker of the House, Philip Gunn, championed not so long back, 2-3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Right. Well, we had two. We had House Bill 571 and House Bill 1559. Both of those have been landmark pieces of legislation that really put us on the radar of the whole country, especially the last one. And actually, that bill set up this rapid response that we're talking about. It mandated it, put it in law that these things had to happen when a minor victim was recovered. Yeah. And it also set up, and Dean referenced this, but it set up the Mississippi Human Trafficking Operational Task Force Board that's responsible for going throughout the state and our academies and training investigators to be certified law enforcement investigators. And right now we've got well over 250 across the state that have been certified in that process. So we're really, that's really also making a difference as far as the people on the ground who are seasoned investigators who are given the tools to really start to identify these cases. Right. So it was great legislation. It's really making a difference, and we just are thankful that we got that support from the legislature.
Do you feel we need more legislatively? Is there something else you'd like to see happen or amendments to this? How about something at the federal level?
Well, we're constantly tweaking different things that, you have law and then you have case law.
Sure.
And one of the things that we like to do is work with Shared Hope, who is our national provider, well, actually international provider. They give us a lot of assistance when it comes to policy recommendations. I mean, they're tracking everything that's happening across the country. And so they help us make some decisions about recommended policy. So we do that. We kind of have a check-in with them every year, and actually the speaker's looking at that right now, so we'll see.
Unbelievable. Well, thanks to both of you for coming in the studio today and discussing this very important subject with us. And
thank you for having us.
Keep fighting it. We appreciate your efforts, and we're going to keep praying about it. It's heartbreaking, honestly. Chief, when you shared those stories, it bothered me for a while, I got to tell you.
Well, and that's just the stories about it. You think about it if you walked in and actually saw it.
I can't comprehend it. Thank you, guys.
Prayers are needed, for sure.
Absolutely. We'll take a break in the Element Wealth Studios on middays. We're coming right back.